There is something deeply wrong inside the Indiana Fever organization right now, and the evidence of that dysfunction has reached a point where it can no longer be compartmentalized into separate, isolated conversations about coaching philosophy or individual game decisions or roster construction or marketing approaches. Everything that has been building across this season is connecting. Everything is converging into a single, unified picture of an organizational environment that is actively failing its most important player in ways that are now producing visible, documented, and commercially measurable consequences that the front office can no longer manage through carefully worded statements or strategic deflection. Let us start with what observers noted during the most recent game, because what was visible carries significance that goes beyond routine game analysis. Reports about a back injury circulated in connection with Caitlin Clark, and those watching the game carefully noted something that went well beyond the physical management of a routine injury. During timeout breaks, moments when players typically move to the huddle with competitive energy, engagement, and the visible urgency of players invested in what is happening on the floor, Clark was observed sitting on the bench in a manner that suggested she was carrying something heavier than physical discomfort, not engaging with the huddle in her customary way, looking away from the action at various points throughout the game. The body language being processed by observers was not that of a player pushing through a minor physical issue while maintaining competitive fire. It was the body language of someone whose relationship with the professional environment surrounding her has reached a point of visible and sustained strain. Whether that reading captures the complete internal truth of what Clark was experiencing in those specific moments is something only she and those in her inner circle can fully answer with certainty. But the accumulated context of this entire season, the coaching staff confrontations captured on camera and distributed widely, the sustained visible frustration with organizational decisions, the documented arm pull, the repeated bench interactions that Clark has responded to with clear discomfort, all of it creates a backdrop against which that body language carries weight that cannot simply be filed away as a routine, difficult night for a player managing a minor physical issue. The fan community that has been watching this situation develop all season is not filing it away. They are connecting it to every previous data point this season has generated and reaching conclusions that the Indiana Fever organization needs to hear plainly rather than filter through public relations management. The injury reporting question adds a procedural dimension to this situation that carries legitimate organizational consequences worth examining directly. The WNBA has established clear and specific guidelines about player injury disclosure. Teams are required to report information about player injuries, illnesses, or other conditions potentially affecting participation status by 5 p.m. local time the day before a game, with specific provisions for back-to-back scheduling situations. These rules exist for fundamental and important reasons. They protect the integrity of the competitive product. They provide fans who have purchased tickets with the transparency they need to make informed decisions about their investments. They establish a baseline of organizational accountability that the league requires of every franchise operating within it. The question being raised in connection with this situation is whether the Indiana Fever fulfilled those reporting obligations regarding Clark's condition. If a player whose game participation may have been affected by an injury or other condition was not reported through the required channels within the specified time frame, that represents not merely a procedural failure, but a fundamental breach of the trust that ticket purchasing fans extend to a franchise when they make financial and logistical commitments based on the reasonable expectation that the player they came to see will be available and that they will be informed in advance if she is not. Fans who arrange travel, purchase tickets at market rates, organize their schedules and their families around attending this game deserved the transparency those reporting rules are designed to guarantee. When that transparency is absent or delayed, the organizational damage to the fan-base relationship compounds every other strain that has already accumulated across this difficult season. The attendance situation in this game made that damaged relationship physically and undeniably visible. The stands during this contest contained significant sections of empty seats, observable from broadcast footage during a game that once would have drawn a capacity crowd, driven by the organic demand that Caitlin Clark's presence generated. Indiana's attendance ranking, which had been reported at 5th in the league, is now under active pressure from declining turnout that the organizational direction of this season has produced. The visible gaps in a building that was once the most coveted ticket destination in women's professional basketball are not random or coincidental occurrences. They are the stadium-sized expression of a fan community that has processed what this organization has been doing across an entire season and responded by exercising the only leverage available to any consumer group, the decision to stay home. Empty seats tell a story that no promotional giveaway, no discount bundling, and no organizational communication campaign can adequately address. That story is about trust. Specifically, it is about the systematic erosion of the relationship between the Indiana Fever and the fan community that transformed this franchise into something genuinely and historically significant. That trust was built by Caitlin Clark's arrival, her extraordinary performance, her authentic connection to the city of Indianapolis, and her evident personal commitment to the community she represents. It is being actively destroyed by organizational decisions that have communicated repeatedly through multiple channels across an entire season that the people running this franchise do not fully comprehend what Clark's presence means or what it demands from them in reciprocal commitment and organizational respect. Now we must confront the larger and most consequential conversation that everything this season has produced has made impossible to avoid any longer. The discussion surrounding Clark's contractual situation and what it signals about her future with this organization has moved decisively from the realm of speculative fan discourse into something with direct and immediate organizational implications that demand urgent attention from every level of the Indiana Fever's leadership structure. Clark has not committed to opting into the Supermax contract extension that her first-team All-WNBA designation during her rookie contract would make available to her. She has not locked in her financial future with the Indiana Fever, and in the full context of a season that has produced everything documented above, the coaching staff confrontations, the documented bench body language, the injury reporting questions, the visibly declining attendance, the sustained and recurring organizational friction, that contractual ambiguity is not a neutral administrative detail waiting to be resolved through routine negotiation. It is a signal, a clear, deliberate, and unmistakable signal from a player of extraordinary leverage about the conditions of her current professional environment and whether those conditions have earned her long-term commitment. Professional athletes of Clark's caliber and commercial significance do not remain uncommitted to contract extensions arbitrarily. When a player who has demonstrated everything Clark has demonstrated, leading the league in scoring, extending her own historical records, delivering the most significant commercial impact in the history of women's professional basketball, declines to commit her future to an organization, she is communicating something specific about that organization. She is, through that deliberate ambiguity, sending the message that her continued presence is conditional on organizational conditions that have not yet been met, that the franchise has not yet demonstrated through its actions and its decisions that it deserves the commitment being asked of her. The possibility of Clark eventually pursuing professional opportunities elsewhere has moved from hypothetical fan speculation into a legitimate organizational risk scenario that should be occupying the primary attention of every decision-maker inside the Indiana Fever. Specific destinations have entered the conversation. The Toronto Tempo and head coach Sandy Brondello have been cited as a potential landing spot that could offer Clark the coaching relationship and organizational environment that her talent demands and that her current situation has consistently failed to provide. The alignment between a player who performs at her highest level when coaches build systems around her natural game and an organization with the infrastructure and leadership philosophy to create that environment is a real and meaningful competitive consideration when a player of Clark's profile is evaluating her long-term options. Here is the organizational reality that the Indiana Fever's leadership structure needs to absorb with complete clarity. If Caitlin Clark leaves Indianapolis, she does not simply take her individual playing ability to another franchise. She takes the entire commercial ecosystem that her presence created. The audience follows Clark, not the franchise's colors. The national media attention follows Clark. The merchandise demand follows Clark. The broadcast viewership that has made Indiana relevant to national broadcast partners and commercial sponsors follows Clark wherever she plays. Every franchise in this league that gains Caitlin Clark becomes what the Indiana Fever currently are at their commercial peak. Every franchise that loses her discovers the commercial reality that the declining attendance figures and the promotional gimmicks are already previewing in real time. This is not a theoretical warning. This is a straightforward economic description of what the Indiana Fever have built and what they are risking through the accumulated organizational decisions of this season. The franchise was commercially irrelevant before Clark arrived. It became the most discussed, most commercially significant franchise in women's basketball because of Clark's presence. Every dollar of commercial value this franchise currently possesses is downstream of her arrival, and the conditions being created within this organizational environment are making her departure a realistic possibility that must be confronted honestly rather than managed diplomatically. The accountability structure within this organization is the central and defining issue. Stephanie White, Amber Cox, and Kelly Krossoff have been described consistently as operating in lockstep, a unified leadership coalition collectively responsible for the organizational direction that has produced this season's accumulating outcomes. That framing is important because it correctly identifies the dysfunction as systemic rather than attributable to any single individual decision or single coaching hire. This is not a problem that resolves through one targeted personnel change while the surrounding organizational culture continues unchanged. It is a culture problem that runs through decision-making at multiple levels simultaneously and requires genuine structural accountability, the kind that produces visible, consequential organizational change to meaningfully address. What has this leadership coalition collectively produced across this season? A player whose bench demeanor during timeout breaks has observers drawing conclusions about her psychological engagement with the organizational environment. A fan base that has moved from digital frustration into formal organized resistance, declining to purchase tickets in numbers that are visibly impacting attendance rankings that once required no promotional support. A publicly questionable injury reporting situation that raises compliance questions with league guidelines. A coaching philosophy that has publicly announced offensive priorities inconsistent with maximizing the player leading the league in scoring. Documented physical interactions with Clark that she has visibly and repeatedly resisted through pulled arms, sustained confrontations, and body language that has been captured and distributed publicly. And a contractual situation where the player who rescued this franchise from competitive and commercial irrelevance has declined to commit her future to it. These are not separate problems sharing only the coincidence of a calendar year. They are the deeply interconnected outputs of an organizational culture that has failed to establish what any professional sports franchise must establish to retain a generational talent. The conditions where that talent feels sufficiently valued, supported, respected, and invested in to choose to stay. The Indiana Fever are still winning basketball games. Clark is still producing at an extraordinary individual level despite the organizational friction that has defined her professional environment this season. The franchise has not descended into complete competitive collapse. Those facts deserve honest acknowledgement as part of the complete picture, but trajectory is what matters in organizational analysis. The direction of travel determines the ultimate destination, and the direction of travel, assessed honestly and completely against everything this season has documented across its full arc, is toward outcomes that the Indiana Fever's leadership should be working with maximum urgency to redirect. Clark's leverage is not abstract or theoretical. It is commercially real, contractually actionable, and directly connected to every revenue stream this franchise depends on to operate. Her fan base follows her identity, not the franchise's institutional history. Her presence is the difference between a building generating organic demand that exceeds capacity and a building requiring promotional incentives to approach respectable attendance numbers. The franchise that creates and sustains the conditions where she commits her future will inherit everything her presence generates across the remainder of her prime professional years. The franchise that fails to create those conditions will discover, through the most economically direct feedback mechanism available, exactly what the value of those years was and exactly what organizational decisions cost them. The empty seats in that building during the most recent game are not the endpoint of this story. They are an early indicator of what the endpoint looks like if the organizational direction does not change. The bench body language is an indicator. The contractual ambiguity is the clearest indicator of all. They belong to the same narrative, point in the same direction, and are being generated by the same underlying organizational failures that have defined this season from its opening games. The window for demonstrating genuine organizational accountability and genuine, visible commitment to the conditions that make Clark's continued presence in Indianapolis her chosen professional future remains open. But it is narrowing with every incident, every empty seat, every decline in the trust between this franchise and the fan community that made it matter, and every day that passes without the structural changes the accumulated evidence of this season has demanded with increasing urgency. The signal Clark is sending through her contractual ambiguity is the most direct signal any player of her stature can send without making a formal public demand. The Indiana Fever organization needs to receive that signal for exactly what it is, respond to it with organizational actions that match its weight, and demonstrate through those actions that the people running this franchise have finally and fully understood what they have, what they are risking, and what is required to preserve it. The clock is running. The seats are emptying. The signal is clear. What happens next belongs entirely to the people inside that organization who still have the authority and the opportunity to change the outcome.